They thought she was just another warehouse supervisor checking inventory and managing shipping schedules. But when an elite special forces team went missing behind enemy lines in the mountains of Eastern Europe, Captain Elena Vasquez was the only person who could bring them home. Because what the logistics company didn't know was that their quiet floor manager had once led the most dangerous rescue missions in military history. The morning sun filtered through the industrial windows of Global Supply Solutions as Elena Vasquez adjusted her company-issued safety vest for what felt like the 100th time. Her movements were precise and economical, each gesture reflecting years of discipline that her civilian colleagues had never questioned. To them, she was simply Elena, the warehouse supervisor who arrived first and left last, who could organize complex shipping operations with an efficiency that impressed even the most demanding corporate clients. Her desk sat in the corner of the warehouse floor, positioned so she could observe every aspect of the operation while remaining inconspicuous among the towering shelves of inventory. The other supervisors respected her quiet competence, her ability to solve logistical nightmares that would paralyze less experienced managers, and her uncanny talent for predicting supply chain disruptions before they became critical problems. What they saw was a dedicated employee who understood the intricacies of international shipping, customs regulations, and warehouse management with remarkable depth. Elena's understanding of international logistics went far beyond civilian applications. Those same skills that made her invaluable in managing commercial supply chains had once been used to coordinate military operations across multiple theaters of war. The warehouse layout she optimized for maximum efficiency was organized according to principles she'd learned while managing forward operating bases in Afghanistan. Her ability to track inventory across multiple locations drew from experience maintaining ammunition and supply caches for special operations units operating behind enemy lines. The radio headset she wore to communicate with truck drivers and shipping coordinators was a pale shadow of the military communications equipment she'd once used to guide rescue helicopters through hostile airspace. Her talent for reading shipping manifests and tracking documentation had been honed while managing classified supply operations where a single error could compromise entire missions and cost lives. Every day she applied military-grade operational planning to civilian logistics, finding comfort in problems that seemed manageable compared to the life-and-death decisions she'd made as a captain in the Army's 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. Elena had been one of the few female officers qualified to command search and rescue operations in the world's most dangerous combat zones. Her specialty had been what the military euphemistically called personnel recovery, the high-risk missions that involved extracting wounded soldiers, downed pilots, and captured intelligence operatives from behind enemy lines. She'd planned and executed over 40 successful rescue missions, each one requiring split-second decisions, improvised solutions, and the kind of tactical thinking that kept people alive when everything else failed. But a helicopter crash during her final mission had left her with enough injuries to end her military career and enough survivor's guilt to make her seek the anonymity of civilian life. The woman who had once been trusted with the lives of America's most elite soldiers now found peace in the predictable rhythms of warehouse management, where the worst crisis might be a delayed shipment rather than a team of special forces operators trapped in enemy territory with no way home. Hey everyone, welcome to our channel. We're so excited to have you here with us today. If you're enjoying our content, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. It really helps us out. Share this video with your friends who might love it too. Your support means everything to us and keeps us motivated to create more amazing content for you. Thanks for being part of our awesome community. Now, let's jump right into today's video. Her transition to civilian life had been deliberately unremarkable. She'd chosen Global Supply Solutions, specifically because it was a mid-sized company where she could blend into the background while using her organizational skills in ways that didn't draw attention to her military past. The company handled logistics for various government contractors, but Elena had carefully positioned herself in the commercial division, managing shipments of construction materials, industrial equipment, and consumer goods that had no connection to military operations. Her colleagues knew she was a veteran. The company valued military experience in logistics roles, but they assumed she'd been a supply clerk or transportation coordinator, someone who understood military procurement procedures, but hadn't been involved in actual combat operations. Elena encouraged this assumption, finding it easier to let others underestimate her capabilities than to explain the reality of her service record. She'd learned to translate her military expertise into civilian terms, offering suggestions that sounded like common sense rather than tactical analysis. When newer employees asked about her military experience, Elena would mention her logistics background and quickly redirect the conversation to current warehouse operations. She'd perfected the art of being helpful without being remarkable, of solving problems efficiently without revealing the depth of knowledge she was drawing from. Her office walls displayed her civilian certifications and safety awards, while her military commendations remained locked in a storage unit across town, too painful to display and too important to discard. The daily routine of warehouse management provided structure without the constant stress of life or death decisions. Elena would arrive at 6 a.m., review overnight reports, coordinate with the shipping department, and spend her day ensuring that thousands of items moved efficiently from storage to delivery trucks. She enjoyed the puzzle-like aspects of optimizing routes and managing inventory, finding satisfaction in problems that had clear solutions and measurable outcomes. Her team of warehouse workers respected her fair but firm management style, appreciating that she understood their jobs from the ground up and never asked them to do anything she couldn't do herself. She would often be found moving inventory alongside her crew, demonstrating loading techniques, or troubleshooting equipment problems with the hands-on approach that had served her well in military settings. But they interpreted her physical competence and tactical thinking as the natural result of warehouse experience rather than combat training. Elena's superiors at Global Supply Solutions valued her reliability and her ability to handle complex logistics challenges without drama or complaint. She had a reputation for being the person who could solve problems that stumped other supervisors, who could coordinate multiple shipments across different time zones, and who somehow always seemed to anticipate potential complications before they became critical issues. Her performance reviews consistently praised her attention to detail, her leadership capabilities, and her knack for maintaining operational efficiency under pressure. But what they didn't understand was that Elena's definition of pressure had been calibrated by experiences that civilian logistics could never replicate. The stress of managing delayed shipments or dealing with difficult customers seemed trivial compared to coordinating rescue operations while under enemy fire. Her ability to remain calm during warehouse emergencies drew from a reservoir of experience. That included making life or death decisions while helicopters were taking ground fire and wounded soldiers were counting on her tactical expertise to bring them home safely. The irony wasn't lost on Elena that she'd gone from being responsible for the lives of highly trained special operations soldiers to managing the movement of commercial goods. But the transition had been necessary for her mental health and her desire to find meaning in work that didn't require her to calculate acceptable casualty rates or make decisions that would determine who lived and who died. She'd found peace in the predictable challenges of civilian logistics, where success was measured in on-time deliveries and customer satisfaction, rather than mission completion rates and personnel recovery statistics. During her lunch breaks, Elena would often sit in her car in the parking lot, looking at the mountains visible in the distance and remembering the terrain where she'd once led rescue missions. The peaceful suburban landscape around the warehouse was a stark contrast to the hostile environments where she'd once operated, but the mountains always reminded her of the skills she'd worked so hard to forget. She'd trained in mountain warfare, cold weather operations, and high-altitude rescue techniques that had prepared her for some of the most challenging missions in military history. Her desk drawer contained business cards, shipping schedules, and inventory reports, but hidden beneath the everyday paperwork was a small photo of her final rescue mission crew, the team that had been with her when their helicopter went down, the soldiers who had trusted her leadership during their darkest hour. She kept the photo as a reminder of what she'd lost and what she'd survived, but also as a connection to the person she'd been before civilian. Life taught her to hide her capabilities behind the comfortable facade of warehouse management. Elena Vasquez had successfully become invisible in plain sight, using her extraordinary skills to solve ordinary problems, while carefully concealing the depth of her expertise from colleagues who saw only what they expected to see. She'd built a new life around the principle that some knowledge was too dangerous to share, that some experiences were too intense to explain, and that sometimes the greatest strength came from allowing others to underestimate your capabilities. But she had no way of knowing that her carefully constructed anonymity was about to be shattered by a crisis that would demand every skill she'd tried so hard to forget. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Elena made her way through the familiar maze of shipping containers and inventory shelves that had become her world for the past 3 years. Her steel-toed boots clicked against the concrete floor with the measured cadence of someone who understood that every movement should have purpose, every step should be calculated for maximum efficiency. Around her, the warehouse buzzed with the controlled chaos of the morning shift changeover, forklifts navigating between towering stacks of palletized goods, while workers called out inventory numbers and shipping codes. Her clipboard held the day's priorities. A rush order for construction materials heading to a job site in Colorado, a delayed shipment of industrial equipment that needed to be expedited to avoid penalty fees, and the usual collection of routine deliveries that kept Global Supply Solutions profitable. To her team of 12 warehouse workers, Elena represented stability and competence in an industry where both qualities were increasingly rare. They watched her move through the facility with the quiet confidence of someone who had never encountered a logistical problem she couldn't solve. "Morning, Elena," called out Marcus Rodriguez, a veteran forklift operator who had been with the company for 8 years. "We've got that Colorado shipment staged and ready, but the manifest is showing some discrepancies with the original order. Want me to hold it until we get clarification from the customer?" Elena paused at the staging area where 20 pallets of concrete reinforcement materials waited under protective plastic sheeting. Her eyes scanned the documentation with the systematic thoroughness that her colleagues had come to expect, but her mind was processing information at levels they couldn't perceive. The shipment numbers, delivery coordinates, and routing information triggered memories of similar logistics challenges she'd faced when coordinating supply drops for forward operating bases in mountainous terrain. "The discrepancy is in the rebar specifications," she said, pointing to a line item on the manifest. "The customer ordered grade 60, but we're showing grade 40 in our system. Check the original purchase order against the supplier's shipping documentation. If there's a mismatch, we need to contact the customer before this truck leaves the dock." Marcus nodded and headed back to his workstation, impressed once again by Elena's ability to spot problems that others missed. What he didn't know was that her attention to detail had been honed by years of managing ammunition and equipment inventories where a single error could leave soldiers defenseless in hostile territory. Her ability to read complex shipping documentation drew from experience with classified supply operations, where understanding every detail could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. As Elena continued her morning rounds, she encountered the usual collection of challenges that tested her problem-solving abilities. A shipment of electronic components needed special handling because of temperature sensitivity, requiring her to coordinate with the climate-controlled storage area and arrange for refrigerated transport. Her solution involved reorganizing the entire staging area to accommodate the specialized equipment, a task that she completed with the same tactical thinking she'd once used to establish helicopter landing zones in contested territory. The morning briefing took place in the break room, where Elena gathered her team to review the day's priorities and address any operational concerns. Her presentation style was clear and concise, covering safety protocols, productivity targets, and schedule adjustments with the kind of authoritative delivery that commanded automatic respect. But she was careful to frame her instructions as suggestions rather than orders, maintaining the collaborative atmosphere that civilian workplaces preferred over the direct command structure of military operations. "We're expecting a high-priority delivery this afternoon," Elena announced, consulting her notes. "Government contractor shipment that needs to be processed and loaded within a 4-hour window. I'll need everyone to stay flexible with their assignments in case we need to restructure the workflow." Her team responded with the kind of professional acknowledgement that indicated complete confidence in her leadership. They'd learned that Elena's planning was always comprehensive, her contingency thinking was always thorough, and her execution was always flawless. What they attributed to exceptional civilian management skills was actually the result of military training that had taught her to anticipate every possible complication and prepare multiple solutions for each potential problem. During the lunch break, Elena retreated to her office to review the afternoon's government contractor shipment. The documentation showed routine industrial equipment destined for a construction project overseas, but something about the routing information made her pause. The delivery coordinates were for a logistics hub that she recognized from her military service, a facility that had been used to stage equipment for special operations missions in Eastern Europe. Her security clearance had been revoked when she left the military, but her knowledge of operational geography remained intact. The combination of equipment types, shipping routes, and delivery timelines suggested this wasn't a routine construction project. The materials being shipped were consistent with the kinds of specialized supplies that would be needed to establish a forward operating base in hostile territory. The kind of mission that would require extensive logistical support and careful coordination with military personnel. Elena forced herself to focus on the civilian aspects of the shipment. Her job was to ensure that the materials were properly packaged, correctly documented, and delivered on schedule. The ultimate destination and purpose of the equipment were not her concern, and speculating about military applications would only reopen psychological wounds that she'd worked hard to heal. She'd learned to compartmentalize her knowledge, to separate her understanding of military logistics from her civilian responsibilities. But as she reviewed the shipping manifest, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that she was looking at something more significant than routine government contracting. The equipment list included specialized communication devices, cold weather gear, and high-altitude survival equipment that would be essential for operations in mountainous terrain. The delivery timeline was compressed, suggesting urgency that went beyond normal procurement schedules. The routing information showed intermediate stops at facilities that she knew were associated with special operations. Logistics. Her military experience had taught her to trust her instincts when something didn't feel right, but her civilian position required her to focus on documentation and procedures rather than tactical analysis. Elena made a note to ensure that all security protocols were followed during the loading process, then returned to her routine responsibilities. The afternoon shift was already beginning, and she needed to coordinate with the incoming crew to ensure seamless operational continuity. The government contractor shipment arrived as scheduled, delivered by a convoy of unmarked trucks that waited at the security checkpoint while their documentation was processed. Elena observed the loading process from her office window, noting the professional behavior of the drivers and the specialized equipment they were transporting. The materials were handled with the kind of careful attention that suggested their importance went beyond routine construction supplies. Her phone rang as the last truck pulled away from the loading dock. The caller ID showed the number for Global Supply Solutions corporate headquarters, an unusual occurrence since most communication with upper management went through email or scheduled meetings. Elena answered with her standard professional greeting, expecting to discuss routine operational matters or perhaps receive updated instructions for the government contractor account. "Elena, this is Sarah Chun from the executive office," the voice said, carrying a tone of urgency that immediately put Elena on alert. "I need you to come to the main conference room immediately. There's been a development that requires your immediate attention." The walk from the warehouse floor to the corporate offices took Elena through corridors she rarely visited, past meeting rooms where sales teams discussed client acquisitions and executives reviewed quarterly performance reports. The atmosphere was different from the practical efficiency of the warehouse, filled with the kind of strategic discussions and high-level planning that reminded her of military command centers. But Elena had deliberately chosen to work in operations rather than management, preferring the tangible challenges of logistics to the abstract complexities of corporate politics. The conference room was already occupied when Elena arrived, filled with people she didn't recognize wearing business suits that seemed too formal for a warehouse logistics meeting. Sarah Chun sat at the head of the table, flanked by two men, whose bearing and alertness suggested military or intelligence backgrounds. The atmosphere was tense, charged with the kind of controlled urgency that Elena remembered from mission briefings when time was critical and stakes were high. "Elena, please sit down," Sarah said, gesturing to an empty chair. "What I'm about to tell you is classified information that requires your complete discretion. The government contractor shipment you processed this afternoon was destined for a joint special operations mission in Eastern Europe. 3 hours ago, the team that was supposed to receive those supplies went missing during a reconnaissance operation in hostile territory." The words hit Elena like a physical blow, triggering memories she'd spent years trying to suppress. She could see the faces of soldiers she'd known, could hear the voices of pilots she'd coordinated with, could feel the weight of responsibility. That came with knowing that people's lives depended on the decisions she made. The comfortable distance she'd maintained between her military past and civilian present suddenly collapsed, bringing her face to face with the reality she'd been trying to escape. The missing team consists of 6 special operations personnel who were conducting intelligence gathering in the Carpathian Mountains, Sarah continued. Their last communication was 18 hours ago, and satellite imagery shows they've been compromised by hostile forces. Standard rescue protocols are being initiated, but the terrain and weather conditions are making conventional extraction extremely difficult. Elena's mind was already processing the tactical implications, analyzing terrain features and weather patterns that would affect helicopter operations in mountainous terrain. Her knowledge of special operations procedures was automatically calculating the challenges that would face any rescue mission, from navigation difficulties to enemy defensive positions. But she forced herself to remain silent, waiting to understand why she was being briefed on classified military operations. "The reason you're here," Sarah said, "is because we know about your military background. Your security clearance may have been revoked, but your experience with mountain rescue operations makes you uniquely qualified to understand what we're facing. We need your assessment of the situation and your recommendations for logistical support." The request was carefully phrased to respect the boundaries of Elena's civilian status while acknowledging her military expertise. But Elena could see the deeper implications in the eyes of the men flanking Sarah Chun, could recognize the desperation that came with knowing that conventional resources were insufficient for the mission at hand. They weren't just asking for her professional opinion. They were evaluating her as a potential asset for an operation that would require someone with her specific combination of skills and experience. Elena's fingers traced the edges of the classified briefing documents that had been placed before her, satellite imagery showing terrain that made her stomach tighten with recognition. The Carpathian Mountains stretched across the photographs in stark black and white, their jagged peaks and deep valleys creating a landscape that she knew from personal experience was as beautiful as it was deadly. The missing team's last known position was marked with a red circle that seemed to pulse with urgency, surrounded by topographical lines that told a story of isolation and danger. "The weather window is closing," Colonel Matthews explained, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had made these kinds of decisions before. "We have maybe 36 hours before the storm system moving in from the north makes any kind of extraction impossible. After that, we're looking at a minimum 7-day delay, and frankly, the team doesn't have supplies to last that long." Elena studied the meteorological data with eyes that had learned to read weather patterns as a matter of life and death. The approaching storm system was massive, carrying the kind of wind speeds and precipitation that would ground even the most advanced military aircraft. But more concerning was the temperature drop that would follow, bringing conditions that could kill even highly trained soldiers if they lacked proper shelter and equipment. "What about the standard rescue protocols?" Elena asked, though she already suspected the answer. "The 160th has crews trained for high-altitude mountain operations. This should be within their mission parameters." The silence that followed her question was answer enough. Colonel Matthews exchanged glances with his companion, a civilian contractor whose presence suggested intelligence community involvement. When he finally spoke, his words carried the kind of careful precision that indicated classified information was being shared with someone who no longer had official clearance to receive it. "The 160th attempted a reconnaissance flight this morning," he said. "They encountered surface-to-air missile systems that weren't in the original intelligence briefing. The area has been reinforced with anti-aircraft defenses that make conventional helicopter operations extremely hazardous. We lost contact with the reconnaissance bird for 20 minutes before they managed to extract." Elena felt her pulse quicken. As the tactical picture became clear, the missing team wasn't just lost in hostile territory. They were trapped in an area that had been deliberately fortified against rescue operations. The enemy had anticipated extraction attempts and had positioned weapon systems specifically designed to counter the kind of helicopter-based rescue missions that Elena had once specialized in planning and executing. "The terrain analysis shows 3 possible extraction points," Colonel Matthews continued, pointing to areas marked on the topographical map. "But all of them require approach routes that would expose aircraft to sustained anti-aircraft fire. The conventional wisdom is that the risk to rescue personnel is too high to justify the mission." Elena's mind was already working through the tactical problems, calculating angles of approach and evaluating defensive positions with the kind of systematic analysis that had kept her alive during 40 successful rescue missions. But she could also see the political and military calculations that were driving the official assessment. 6 soldiers, no matter how elite, weren't worth risking an entire rescue crew and expensive aircraft if the probability of success was low. "What about overland extraction?" Elena asked. "Special operations teams have protocols for evading capture and moving to predetermined rally points. If they can reach a more accessible location, conventional rescue becomes possible." The satellite imagery that Colonel Matthews showed her next revealed the true scope of the challenge. The missing team's position was surrounded by hostile forces in a pattern that suggested coordinated search operations. Red markers indicated enemy patrol routes, communication intercepts, and observation posts that created an overlapping network of surveillance and control. The soldiers weren't just lost. They were being actively hunted by forces that understood their capabilities and were prepared to counter their evasion techniques. Intelligence suggests the team was compromised during their initial insertion, the civilian contractor said, speaking for the first time. Their mission was to gather information on weapons transfers in the region, but they walked into what appears to have been a prepared ambush. The enemy knew they were coming and had positioned forces specifically to capture or eliminate them. Elena absorbed this information with the detached professionalism that had been drilled into her during countless mission briefings, but inside, she felt the familiar burning anger that came with knowing that soldiers had been betrayed by intelligence failures. The missing team had trusted the information they'd been given, had planned their mission based on assessments that had proven fatally incomplete. Now they were paying the price for someone else's mistakes. The current rescue plan involves a diversionary assault on the enemy's eastern positions, while extraction aircraft approach from the west, Colonel Matthews explained, showing her a tactical overlay that marked planned routes and timing sequences. But the terrain doesn't provide adequate cover for the approach, and the enemy's defensive positions are too well established for the diversion to be effective. Elena studied the proposed rescue plan with growing concern. The approach routes were predictable, the timing was too rigid, and the entire operation relied on the enemy responding to the diversion exactly as planned. In her experience, rescue missions that depended on enemy cooperation were usually suicide missions disguised as tactical operations. This plan assumes the enemy will commit significant forces to defending their eastern positions, Elena said, pointing to areas on the map where the diversionary assault would take place. But if they recognize it as a feint, they'll ignore the distraction and concentrate on the actual extraction point. The rescue aircraft will be flying into a prepared ambush. The uncomfortable silence that followed her assessment confirmed what Elena had suspected. The official rescue plan was being developed by officers who understood conventional military operations but lacked experience with the kind of improvised, high-risk missions that characterize special operations rescue. They were applying standard, tactical principles to a situation that required unconventional thinking and specialized expertise. The Pentagon is under pressure to authorize the mission within the next 12 hours, Colonel Matthews said. Congressional oversight committees are asking questions about the missing team, and there's political pressure to demonstrate that we don't abandon our people in the field. But the Joint Chiefs are reluctant to authorize an operation with such a low probability of success. Elena understood the political dynamics that were driving the timeline. Military leadership was being forced to choose between risking additional casualties in a potentially futile rescue attempt or accepting the loss of 6 highly trained soldiers who might still be alive and capable of escape. The decision would ultimately be made by people who had never planned a rescue mission under hostile conditions, based on assessments by officers who had never executed the kind of high-risk operations that Elena had specialized in. What about unconventional approaches? Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. Single aircraft insertions, night operations, or approaches that don't follow standard tactical doctrine. The civilian contractor leaned forward, his expression suggesting that Elena had touched on something that had already been discussed and rejected. Those options were evaluated and determined to be outside acceptable risk parameters. The Army doesn't authorize solo rescue missions, and the terrain doesn't support the kind of improvised operations that special operations forces sometimes employ. Elena felt the familiar frustration that came with watching institutional thinking prevent effective action. The military's emphasis on standardized procedures and acceptable risk levels was designed to prevent unnecessary casualties, but it also eliminated the kind of creative problem-solving that often made the difference between mission success and failure. The missing soldiers needed someone who could think outside the constraints of conventional tactical doctrine. The reason we're briefing you on this situation, Colonel Matthews said, is because we need your professional assessment of the rescue plan's viability. Your experience with mountain operations and special operations rescue gives you insights that current military planners might not have. We're hoping you can identify modifications that might improve the probability of success. Elena realized that she was being asked to validate a plan that she could already see was fundamentally flawed. The military leadership needed her expertise to support a decision they had already made, but they weren't prepared to hear recommendations that challenged their basic assumptions about acceptable risk and standard operating procedures. The current plan has maybe a 20% chance of success, Elena said bluntly. The approach routes are too predictable, the timing is too rigid, and the enemy's defensive positions are too well established. If you execute this mission as planned, you'll probably lose the rescue aircraft and crew, in addition to the missing team. The room fell silent as Elena's assessment sank in. Colonel Matthews studied the tactical maps with the expression of someone who had hoped to hear a different evaluation, but wasn't surprised by the conclusion. The civilian contractor made notes on his tablet, probably preparing a report that would recommend against authorizing the rescue mission. Is there an alternative approach that you would recommend? Colonel Matthews asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer would be unacceptable to current military leadership. Elena looked at the satellite imagery one more time, calculating distances and evaluating terrain features with the kind of detailed analysis that had once been her specialty. The solution was clear in her mind, but she knew it involved exactly the kind of unconventional thinking that institutional military planning was designed to prevent. The only approach that might work would require a single aircraft insertion, using terrain masking and weather cover, Elena said. Night operations, flying below radar coverage, landing in areas that aren't suitable for conventional aircraft. It would require a pilot with extensive mountain flying experience and knowledge of the specific terrain features that could provide cover from enemy observation. The silence that followed her recommendation was heavy with implication. Everyone in the room understood that Elena had just described a mission that would violate every standard operating procedure in the military's tactical manual. It would require authorization that no one was prepared to give and expertise that no one was prepared to acknowledge. That kind of operation would be classified as a suicide mission, Colonel Matthews said finally. The Army doesn't authorize solo rescue attempts, and the risk to personnel would be considered unacceptable under current doctrine. Elena nodded, understanding that she had just confirmed what everyone already knew. The missing soldiers would be classified as casualties of war, their sacrifice acknowledged, but their rescue deemed impossible under current military constraints. The knowledge that could save them existed, but the authority to use it was locked behind institutional barriers that valued procedure over results. The weight of institutional protocol settled over the conference room like a suffocating blanket. As Elena watched Colonel Matthews close the classified briefing folder with the finality of a door slamming shut, the satellite imagery disappeared into manila envelopes. The tactical overlays were rolled up and secured with rubber bands, and the meteorological data was filed away as if the approaching storm system would somehow pause its advance while military bureaucracy determined the acceptable level of risk for a rescue operation. The Joint Chiefs will make their final decision within 6 hours, Colonel Matthews announced, his voice carrying the resignation of someone who already knew what that decision would be. Based on current risk assessments and available resources, the probability of authorizing the mission is extremely low. The potential loss of additional personnel and equipment doesn't justify the tactical objectives. Elena felt the familiar burning in her chest that came with watching institutional thinking override tactical necessity. She'd seen this same dynamic play out during her military service, when officers who had never executed high-risk operations made decisions about missions they didn't understand. The missing soldiers would become statistics, their names added to casualty reports that would be filed in Pentagon archives while their bodies remained in foreign mountains. What about international coordination? Elena asked, though she suspected. The answer would be equally frustrating. NATO allies have special operations capabilities that might be more suited to this kind of mission. The terrain is in their backyard, and they have experience with the local conditions. The civilian contractor looked up from his tablet, where he'd been composing what Elena assumed was a report recommending against rescue authorization. Political considerations make international involvement complicated, he said. The missing team's mission involved intelligence gathering that our allies weren't briefed on. Asking for their assistance would require disclosing operational details that are classified above their clearance levels. Elena understood the circular logic that trapped military operations in bureaucratic paralysis. The secrecy that was supposed to protect the mission had become the barrier that prevented its successful completion. The missing soldiers were victims not just of enemy action, but of institutional thinking that prioritized information security over human lives. The families have been notified that their loved ones are missing in action, Colonel Matthews continued. They've been briefed on the standard recovery procedures and the timeline for determining final status. The notification process follows established protocols for special operations casualties. The clinical language of military casualty procedures couldn't disguise the human reality of what Elena was hearing. 6 families were waiting for news that would never come, hoping for rescue operations that would never be authorized, trusting in institutional capabilities that had already proven inadequate. The soldiers who had volunteered for the most dangerous missions were being abandoned by the same institution they had sworn to serve. Elena's phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus Rodriguez asking about overtime scheduling for the evening shift. The mundane concerns of warehouse management seemed surreal in the context of the life and death discussion happening around the conference table. Her civilian responsibilities were waiting for her attention while 6 soldiers slowly died in hostile territory, their fate sealed by institutional decisions that valued procedure over results. The warehouse operation will need to return to normal scheduling, Sarah Chun said, apparently reading Elena's expression. The government contractor account will continue, but future shipments will follow standard protocols. There's no need for special handling procedures or accelerated processing. The dismissal was polite but absolute. Elena's military expertise had been consulted. Her assessment had been received, and her recommendations had been noted for the record. But her role in the decision-making process was finished. She was expected to return to her civilian responsibilities, while others determined the fate of soldiers who might still be alive and capable of rescue. I need to ask for your continued discretion regarding the information shared in this briefing, Colonel Matthews said, producing a non-disclosure agreement that Elena recognized from her military service. The operational details and intelligence assessments are classified, and unauthorized disclosure could compromise ongoing operations. Elena signed the document with the automatic compliance of someone who had spent years following orders, but her mind was already working through the implications of what she'd learned. The missing soldiers were trapped in terrain that she understood better than anyone currently involved in planning their rescue. The weather window was closing according to a timeline that she could calculate with precision. The enemy's defensive positions could be countered using techniques that she had perfected during 40 successful missions. The knowledge existed to save them, but the authority to act on that knowledge was locked behind institutional barriers that valued conformity over competence. Elena had the skills, the experience, and the tactical understanding necessary to plan and execute a successful rescue mission. But she lacked the official position, the current security clearance, and the institutional backing that would make her expertise relevant to the decision-making process. The briefing materials need to remain in this room, the civilian contractor said, gathering the documents and maps that Elena had been studying. Security protocols require that all classified information be properly secured before personnel without current clearance leave the area. Elena watched the satellite imagery disappear into a security pouch, knowing that she was also watching the last official opportunity to save the missing soldiers. The topographical maps that showed potential extraction routes were locked away behind classification levels that excluded anyone who might actually be qualified to use them. The meteorological data that revealed the narrow window for rescue operations was filed in systems that prioritize security over accessibility. The walk back to the warehouse floor felt like a journey between two different worlds. The corporate conference room had been filled with the language of risk assessment and acceptable casualties, while the warehouse represented the practical reality of solving problems with available resources. Elena's transition from military expert back to civilian supervisor was marked by the changing sounds around her, from the hushed tones of classified briefings to the familiar noise of forklifts and conveyor systems. Her team was preparing for the evening shift change, organizing inventory and coordinating with the transportation department to ensure on-time deliveries. Their concerns centered on productivity metrics and safety protocols, the kind of measurable challenges that Elena had found comforting after leaving the military. But now their routine efficiency seemed almost trivial compared to the life and death situation that she'd been forced to walk away from. The government contractor shipment went out on schedule, Marcus Rodriguez reported, consulting his clipboard. All documentation was properly processed, and the drivers confirmed receipt of the special handling instructions. Everything went smoothly. Elena nodded automatically, but her mind was calculating the timeline between when those supplies had left the warehouse and when they should have reached the missing team. The specialized equipment that had been loaded onto those trucks was now sitting in some forward logistics base, waiting for soldiers who would never arrive to claim it. The irony wasn't lost on her that she had personally supervised the shipment of supplies that might have saved the lives of people she was now powerless to help. "We've got a scheduling conflict with tomorrow's deliveries," another team member mentioned. "The construction site in Colorado is requesting expedited shipping, but the trucking company is saying they can't guarantee arrival time because of weather conditions in the mountains." The mention of mountain weather conditions hit Elena like a physical blow, reminding her of the approaching storm system that was sealing the fate of the missing soldiers. While her team worried about delayed deliveries and customer satisfaction, she was thinking about trained warriors slowly freezing to death in hostile territory. The contrast between civilian concerns and military realities had never seemed more stark. Elena's office phone rang with what she assumed would be another routine business call, but the caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. When she answered, the voice on the other end was unfamiliar but carried the kind of authority that immediately commanded attention. "Ms. Vasquez, this is General Patricia Harrison from Joint Special Operations Command," the voice said. "I understand you were briefed on the current situation in Eastern Europe. I need to speak with you immediately about options that may not have been fully explored." The call was being made on an unsecured line, which meant General Harrison was limited in what she could discuss directly. But Elena understood the subtext immediately. Someone with actual operational authority had reviewed the briefing materials and reached conclusions that differed from the official assessment. The fact that a general was calling a civilian warehouse supervisor suggested that institutional channels were being bypassed in favor of direct communication. "I'm available for consultation," Elena replied carefully, understanding that she was being offered an opportunity to influence decisions that had already been made through official channels. "My schedule is flexible, and I can provide whatever assessment you need." The general's next words carried implications that Elena immediately recognized. "The situation has evolved since your initial briefing. New intelligence has become available that changes the tactical picture. I need someone with your specific expertise to review the updated information and provide recommendations that might not be obvious to current planning staff. Elena understood that she was being told the rescue mission was still active, despite the official assessment that had deemed it unfeasible. Someone with sufficient authority was keeping the operation alive, probably against the recommendations of subordinate officers who lacked the experience to evaluate unconventional approaches. The general was reaching out to Elena because institutional military planning had failed to produce viable options. I can be available within the hour, Elena said, already calculating the time needed to arrange coverage for her warehouse responsibilities. Should I report to the same location as this morning's briefing? The general's response confirmed Elena's suspicions about the unofficial nature of the consultation. I'll send a driver to your location. The briefing will take place at a facility that's better equipped for the kind of planning this mission requires. Bring whatever personal gear you might need for an extended consultation. The call ended with Elena staring at her phone, understanding that she had just agreed to something that would probably end her civilian career and possibly her freedom. Consulting on classified military operations without proper clearance was a federal crime, but refusing to help when she possessed knowledge that could save lives was a moral crime that she wasn't prepared to commit. Hey everyone, welcome to our channel. We're so excited to have you here with us today. If you're enjoying our content, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. It really helps us out. Share this video with your friends who might love it too. Your support means everything to us and keeps us motivated to create more amazing content for you. Thanks for being part of our awesome community. Now let's jump right into today's video. Her civilian life, carefully constructed over 3 years of deliberate anonymity, was about to be sacrificed for the opportunity to do what she had always done best: bring soldiers home alive. The institutional barriers that had seemed insurmountable during the morning briefing were apparently more flexible than she had been led to believe, at least when the right people were willing to bypass standard procedures. Elena locked her office and walked back onto the warehouse floor, where her team was continuing their routine operations with the efficient professionalism that had made her proud to work with them. They had no idea that their supervisor was about to disappear into a classified world where success was measured in lives saved rather than products delivered. The black SUV that arrived at Global Supply Solutions moved with the kind of purposeful discretion that Elena recognized from her military days. No government plates, no obvious security features, but the driver's bearing and the way he scanned the parking lot before stepping out marked him as someone accustomed to transporting people who preferred not to be noticed. Elena had packed a small bag with personal items, telling Marcus Rodriguez that she was responding to a family emergency and would be unavailable for the next few days. The drive through the city took them past familiar landmarks that Elena had driven by countless times during her civilian routine, but now everything felt different. The shopping centers and office buildings that had once represented the comfortable predictability of her new life were fading into the background as she moved back toward the world she had tried to leave behind. The driver maintained professional silence, but Elena could feel the weight of classified operations pressing down on her with each mile they traveled. The secure facility they arrived at was unmarked and unremarkable, a converted office building that could have housed any number of government contractors or consulting firms. But Elena's trained eye noticed the subtle security features that marked it as something far more sensitive: reinforced windows, multiple checkpoints, and the kind of personnel screening that suggested highly classified activities. The driver escorted her through a series of security doors, each one requiring different credentials and moving them deeper into a facility that existed outside normal bureaucratic channels. General Harrison was waiting in a conference room that looked more like a military command center than a corporate meeting space. Multiple screens displayed real-time satellite imagery, weather data, and tactical overlays that were updated continuously by personnel Elena couldn't see. The general herself was younger than Elena had expected, probably in her late 40s, with the kind of intense focus that marked someone who had risen to high rank through operational competence rather than political maneuvering. "Ms. Vasquez, thank you for coming," General Harrison said, extending her hand with the firm grip of someone who had earned respect through demonstrated capability. "I've reviewed your service record and your assessment of this morning's briefing. Your conclusions align with my own evaluation of the situation, which is why I wanted to speak with you directly." The satellite imagery on the main screen showed the same terrain Elena had studied earlier, but now it was overlaid with additional intelligence that painted a clearer picture of the tactical situation. The missing team's last known position was marked with a pulsing red dot, surrounded by enemy patrol routes that had been mapped with greater precision than what she had seen during the morning briefing. The enemy's defensive positions were more extensive than initially assessed, but Elena could also see gaps in their coverage that might provide opportunities for unconventional approaches. "The intelligence picture has evolved significantly since your initial briefing," General Harrison continued, using a laser pointer to highlight specific areas on the tactical display. "We now have confirmation that the missing team is alive and has established defensive positions in a cave system approximately 2 kilometers from their original insertion point. They've been able to maintain intermittent communication using emergency frequencies, but their situation is deteriorating rapidly." Elena studied the updated intelligence with the systematic analysis that had served her well during 40 successful rescue missions. The cave system provided natural protection from enemy observation and small arms fire, but it also trapped the soldiers in a position where conventional rescue operations would be impossible. The terrain around the caves was too rough for helicopter landing, and the enemy's defensive positions commanded clear fields of fire over any approach routes that ground forces might use. "The current rescue plan still involves the diversionary assault that you evaluated this morning," General Harrison said, displaying the tactical overlay that Elena had already identified as fundamentally flawed. "But I wanted your opinion on whether modifications might improve the probability of success, or if there are alternative approaches that conventional planning hasn't considered." Elena could see immediately that the situation had actually gotten worse since the morning briefing. The enemy had reinforced their positions around the cave system, establishing overlapping fields of fire that would make any rescue attempt extremely hazardous. The approaching storm system had intensified, reducing the already narrow window for air operations to perhaps 18 hours before weather conditions would make flight impossible. "The diversionary assault won't work," Elena said bluntly, pointing to the enemy defensive positions on the tactical display. "They've positioned their forces specifically to counter that kind of conventional approach. The assault team will take heavy casualties, and the rescue aircraft will still be flying into a prepared ambush at the extraction point." General Harrison nodded grimly, confirming Elena's assessment. "That's my conclusion as well. The Joint Chiefs are meeting in 4 hours to make their final decision, and based on current risk assessments, they're going to cancel the mission. The potential loss of additional personnel doesn't justify the tactical objectives, especially given the low probability of success." Elena felt the familiar frustration that came with watching institutional thinking override tactical necessity. The missing soldiers would be abandoned because conventional military planning couldn't produce a solution that fit within acceptable risk parameters. The knowledge and experience that could save them existed, but it was being dismissed because it didn't conform to standard operating procedures. "What about the families?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer would be equally frustrating. "They're going to be told that everything possible was done, even though alternative approaches were never seriously considered." The general's expression showed the weight of command responsibility that Elena remembered from her own military service. The families will be briefed on the standard recovery procedures and the timeline for determining final status. They'll be told that the mission was evaluated at the highest levels and that the risks were deemed unacceptable. Elena understood the human cost of institutional decision-making. 6 families would spend the rest of their lives wondering if their loved ones could have been saved, if someone with different expertise or greater authority might have found a solution that conventional planning had missed. The soldiers themselves would die knowing that their own institution had written them off as acceptable casualties. "There is one alternative that I haven't discussed with anyone else," General Harrison said, her voice carrying the weight of someone about to propose something that violated every standard military procedure. "It would require someone with your specific expertise and experience, operating outside normal command channels and without official authorization." Elena felt her pulse quicken as she realized what the general was suggesting. The institutional barriers that had seemed insurmountable during the morning briefing were being bypassed entirely, replaced by a direct appeal to her personal commitment to bringing soldiers home alive. The general was offering her the opportunity to do what she had always done best, but without the legal protection and institutional support that had made her previous missions possible. The mission would be classified as a civilian contractor operation, General Harrison continued, displaying documents that Elena recognized as the kind of legal frameworks used to authorize activities that couldn't be officially acknowledged. "You would be provided with necessary resources and intelligence support, but the operation would be conducted without official military backing. Success or failure would be entirely your responsibility." Elena studied the contractor agreements with the understanding that she was being offered a choice between comfortable anonymity and potentially suicidal heroism. The documents were carefully worded to provide legal protection for the military, while placing all operational risk on her shoulders. If the mission succeeded, she would be quietly acknowledged as a contractor who had performed valuable services. If it failed, she would be classified as a rogue operator who had acted without proper authorization. "The timeline is extremely compressed," General Harrison said, pointing to the meteorological data that showed the approaching storm system. "The weather window closes in 16 hours, and the enemy's positions are being reinforced continuously. Any rescue attempt would need to be executed tonight, using resources that are already in theater." Elena realized that she was being presented with the same impossible choice that had defined her military career: accept unacceptable risk to save soldiers who were counting on her expertise, or follow institutional procedures that would result in their deaths. The general was offering her the opportunity to be the person she had always been, but without the legal protection and institutional support that had made her previous missions survivable. What resources would be available? Elena asked, though she already understood that the answer would be minimal. Aircraft, support personnel, intelligence assets. The general's response confirmed Elena's expectations. "You would have access to a single helicopter with a pilot who has experience in mountain operations. Intelligence support would be provided through secure communication channels, but you would be operating without backup or extraction capabilities. The mission would be entirely self-contained." Elena studied the tactical situation one more time, calculating the risks and evaluating the chances of success with the kind of systematic analysis that had kept her alive during 40 previous missions. The odds were terrible, the support was minimal, and the consequences of failure would be catastrophic. But the alternative was watching 6 soldiers die while knowing that she possessed the knowledge and experience that could save them. The pilot would need to be someone with extensive mountain flying experience, Elena said, already beginning to plan the mission that she knew she couldn't refuse. Night operations capability, familiarity with terrain-following techniques, and the ability to operate in weather conditions that would ground conventional aircraft. General Harrison smiled for the first time since Elena had arrived, recognizing the shift in her tone from evaluation to planning. The pilot I have in mind meets all those criteria. He's former Special Operations Aviation, currently working as a contractor for intelligence community operations. He's been briefed on the situation and has volunteered for the mission. Elena felt the weight of decision settling on her shoulders like a familiar burden. The comfortable anonymity of her civilian life was about to be sacrificed for the opportunity to do what institutional military planning had deemed impossible. The warehouse supervisor who had spent 3 years hiding her capabilities was about to become the only person willing to risk everything to bring soldiers home alive. "I'll need complete tactical intelligence on the enemy positions," Elena said, accepting the mission with the same quiet determination that had characterized her military service. Real-time weather updates, communication frequencies for the missing team, and backup extraction protocols in case the primary mission fails. The general's relief was visible as she realized that Elena had made the choice that everyone had hoped she would make. The institutional barriers that had seemed insurmountable were being bypassed by someone who valued lives over procedures, who understood that sometimes the greatest service required the greatest risk. "The mission briefing will begin immediately," General Harrison said, activating communication systems that would connect Elena with resources that officially didn't exist. "You'll have access to everything we know about the tactical situation. But remember that you're operating without official authorization. Success will save 6 lives, but failure will probably cost you your own." Elena nodded, understanding that she had just committed to a mission that would either redeem her military service or end her life. The institutional thinking that had abandoned the missing soldiers was being replaced by the kind of individual commitment had always defined special operations. The quiet warehouse supervisor was about to become the only person willing to fly into enemy territory to save soldiers that everyone else had written off as acceptable casualties. The mission briefing room transformed into a nerve center of focused intensity as Elena stepped fully back into the role she had spent 3 years trying to forget. The multiple screens displayed real-time intelligence feeds that painted a picture of deteriorating conditions and narrowing options, while secure communication channels crackled with updates from assets positioned throughout Eastern Europe. The comfortable distance she had maintained between her military expertise and civilian responsibilities collapsed entirely as she absorbed tactical information that would determine whether 6 soldiers lived or died. The missing team's last communication was 47 minutes ago. Colonel Stevens reported, his voice carrying the tension of someone coordinating a mission that existed in the gray area between official authorization and plausible deniability. "They've confirmed their position in the cave system, but they're reporting ammunition shortages and hypothermia symptoms among 3 team members. The enemy has increased patrol frequency and is using thermal imaging equipment to scan the area." Elena studied the thermal imagery that showed heat signatures moving through the mountainous terrain in patterns that revealed the enemy's search strategy. The hostile forces were conducting systematic sweeps that would eventually locate the hidden soldiers, but their movement patterns also revealed gaps in coverage that a skilled operator might exploit. The enemy's confidence was apparent in their methodical approach, but Elena recognized tactical opportunities that conventional military planning would have missed. "What's the current weather situation?" Elena asked, knowing that atmospheric conditions would be the determining factor in whether any rescue attempt was feasible. "The storm system looked like it was accelerating when I saw the earlier forecasts." The meteorological officer, a civilian contractor who had been monitoring conditions throughout the day, pointed to satellite imagery that showed the approaching weather front in stark detail. "The storm system has intensified beyond initial projections. We're looking at sustained winds of 45 miles per hour within 6 hours, with gusts up to 70. Visibility will drop to near zero, and the temperature will fall below -20 degrees Fahrenheit." Elena absorbed this information with the understanding that weather would be both her greatest challenge and her most valuable asset. The Approaching storm would make flight operations extremely dangerous, but it would also provide cover from enemy radar systems and visual observation. The key would be timing the mission to exploit the storm's interference capabilities while avoiding its most destructive effects. The aircraft is a modified Bell 407 with specialized navigation equipment and cold weather modifications, the operations coordinator explained, displaying technical specifications that Elena recognized from her military service. The pilot is Chief Warrant Officer Jake Morrison, formerly of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. He's been contracted for intelligence community operations and has extensive experience with high-risk insertion missions. Elena reviewed Morrison's service record with the critical eye of someone who understood that pilot selection could make the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. His flight hours in mountainous terrain were impressive. His combat experience was extensive, and his familiarity with the specific aircraft type was exactly what the mission required. But what impressed her most was his track record of successful extractions under hostile conditions, including 3 missions that had been classified as impossible by conventional assessment. The insertion route will take us through a corridor that's temporarily clear of enemy air defenses, Colonel Stevens continued, tracing a path on the tactical display that would require precision navigation and perfect timing. Intelligence assets have confirmed that the surface-to-air missile systems are experiencing maintenance issues that will create a 4-hour window of reduced capability. Elena studied the proposed flight path with the systematic analysis that had characterized her military planning. The route was audacious, requiring low-level flight through terrain that would challenge even the most skilled pilot. But it also exploited vulnerabilities in the enemy's defensive network that conventional military planning might have been too cautious to utilize. What about extraction options? Elena asked, already knowing that the answer would be the most challenging aspect of the mission. Getting to the missing team is only half the problem. Bringing them out alive requires different tactical considerations. The satellite imagery that Colonel Stevens displayed showed the terrain around the cave system in unforgiving detail. The slopes were too steep for conventional helicopter landing. The enemy's defensive positions commanded clear fields of fire over potential extraction points, and the approaching storm would make hovering operations extremely hazardous. Elena realized that extraction would require techniques that pushed both aircraft and crew beyond their normal operational limits. The extraction plan involves a winch operation from a hovering position above the cave system, the operations coordinator explained, showing Elena equipment specifications that she recognized from her most challenging military missions. The aircraft will maintain position using terrain masking while team members are lifted individually to the cabin. Total extraction time is estimated at 8 minutes. Elena calculated the tactical implications of an 8-minute hovering operation in hostile territory during adverse weather conditions. The helicopter would be vulnerable to enemy fire for the entire duration. The pilot would be flying blind in conditions that would challenge even the most advanced navigation systems, and any equipment failure would result in the loss of both rescue team and rescued soldiers. The communication plan involves direct contact with the missing team using emergency frequencies that the enemy hasn't been able to intercept, Colonel Stevens said, handing Elena a radio headset that would connect her with the soldiers she was risking her life to save. You'll be able to coordinate with them during the approach and provide tactical guidance during the extraction. Elena tested the communication equipment with the professional efficiency that had characterized her military service, but she was also thinking about the psychological impact of making contact with soldiers who had probably given up hope of rescue. The missing team would be dealing with hypothermia, ammunition shortages, and the psychological stress of being hunted by enemy forces. Their ability to assist in their own extraction would be compromised by physical and mental exhaustion. The rules of engagement are deliberately vague, General Harrison said. her voice carrying the weight of someone who was authorizing the mission that couldn't be officially acknowledged. You're authorized to use whatever force is necessary to complete the mission, but remember that you're operating without official military backing. Any actions you take will be classified as contractor operations. Elena understood the legal implications of operating outside official military channels. She would have the freedom to make tactical decisions that might be prohibited under normal rules of engagement, but she would also bear full responsibility for any consequences of those decisions. The institutional protection that had covered her previous missions was being replaced by personal accountability that could result in criminal prosecution if the mission went wrong. The equipment package includes specialized cold weather gear, emergency medical supplies, and enough ammunition to handle sustained contact with enemy forces, the operations coordinator said, showing Elena equipment that had been carefully selected for the specific challenges of the mission. Weight limitations require that you carry only essential items, but everything you need for mission success is available. Elena examined the equipment with the critical assessment of someone who understood that gear selection could determine survival in hostile territory. The cold weather clothing was military grade, designed for extended exposure to the kinds of temperatures that would be encountered during the mission. The medical supplies were comprehensive enough to handle trauma injuries and hypothermia, while the ammunition selection was appropriate for the enemy weapon systems that intelligence had identified in the area. The timeline is compressed beyond normal mission parameters, Colonel Stevens said, pointing to a digital countdown that showed the remaining time before weather conditions would make flight impossible. Launch is scheduled for 2,300 hours, which gives you 90 minutes to complete final preparations and conduct pilot coordination. Elena felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with approaching combat operations, but she also recognized the unique challenges of a mission that had been planned in hours rather than weeks. Normal military operations involved extensive preparation, detailed contingency planning, and multiple rehearsals that built crew coordination and identified potential problems. This mission would be executed with minimal preparation by people who had never worked together under combat conditions. Chief Morrison is conducting final aircraft checks and route planning, General Harrison said, activating a communication channel that would connect Elena with the pilot whose skills would determine whether the mission succeeded or failed. You'll have 20 minutes to coordinate with him before final equipment checks and departure. Elena realized that she was about to meet the person whose competence would be as critical as her own in determining whether 6 soldiers lived or died. The pilot would need to execute flying techniques that pushed both aircraft and crew beyond normal operational limits, maintaining precision navigation under conditions that would challenge even the most advanced systems. Their ability to work together as a team would be tested under circumstances that offered no margin for error. The missing team's current status is stable but deteriorating, Colonel Stevens reported, monitoring communication channels that provided real-time updates on the soldiers' condition. They're conserving ammunition and maintaining defensive positions, but hypothermia is becoming a significant factor. Medical assessment suggests that extraction within the next 6 hours is critical for survival. Elena absorbed this information, with the understanding that time was becoming as dangerous an enemy as the hostile forces surrounding the missing soldiers. The approaching storm would provide tactical cover, but it would also bring temperatures that could kill even highly trained personnel if they lacked proper shelter and equipment. The mission wasn't just about avoiding enemy fire. It was about racing against weather conditions that would make rescue impossible. The final decision point is 30 minutes before scheduled departure, General Harrison said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who was prepared to cancel the mission if conditions became too dangerous. Weather updates, intelligence assessments, and aircraft status will be evaluated continuously. If any factor compromises mission viability, the operation will be scrubbed. Elena understood that she was being offered one last opportunity to step back from a mission that everyone acknowledged was extremely dangerous. The institutional barriers that had originally prevented her involvement were being replaced by personal choice and individual commitment. The comfortable anonymity of civilian life was waiting for her if she decided that the risks were too great, but the lives of 6 soldiers hung in the balance of her decision. "I understand the parameters," Elena said, accepting the mission with the same quiet determination that had characterized her military service. "I'll be ready for departure at 2,300 hours. The room fell silent as Elena's words confirmed what everyone had hoped but no one had dared to assume. The institutional military system that had failed to produce a viable rescue plan was being bypassed by someone who valued lives over procedures, who understood that sometimes the greatest service required the greatest risk. The quiet warehouse supervisor was about to become the only person willing to fly into enemy territory during the storm to save soldiers that conventional wisdom had written off as acceptable casualties. The Bell 407 helicopter sat on the tarmac, like a predator waiting to strike, its rotor blades motionless in the cold night air, while Chief Warrant Officer Jake Morrison conducted his final pre-flight inspection. Elena approached the aircraft with the measured stride of someone who had made this walk before, carrying equipment that felt familiar despite 3 years of civilian life. The helicopter's modifications were immediately apparent: enhanced navigation systems, cold weather modifications, and a kind of specialized equipment that marked it as a machine designed for missions that officially didn't exist. Morrison looked up from his inspection as Elena approached, his expression showing the kind of professional assessment that experienced pilots made when evaluating new crew members. His weathered face and steady hands marked him as someone who had survived enough dangerous missions to understand the difference between acceptable risk and suicide, while his calm demeanor suggested confidence in both his aircraft and his own capabilities. "Elena Vasquez," she said, extending her hand with the firm grip that had become automatic during her military service. "I understand you've been briefed on the mission parameters." Morrison's handshake was equally firm, carrying the kind of mutual respect that developed between professionals who understood they were about to trust each other with their lives. "Jake Morrison, I've reviewed your service record and the tactical situation. This is going to be challenging, but it's not impossible if we execute properly." Elena appreciated the pilot's direct assessment. He wasn't minimizing the dangers they would face, but he also wasn't allowing fear to override professional judgment. The combination of realism and confidence was exactly what the mission required. From someone who would be responsible for flying through hostile territory during adverse weather conditions. "What's your assessment of the weather situation?" Elena asked, studying the meteorological data that Morrison had displayed on his tablet. "The storm system looked like it was accelerating when I saw the earlier forecasts." Morrison pointed to satellite imagery that showed the approaching weather front in stark detail. "The storm is moving faster than initially predicted, but that actually works in our favor. The electromagnetic interference will jam their radar systems, and the precipitation will provide visual cover. The challenge will be maintaining navigation accuracy when our instruments are being affected by the same interference." Elena understood the tactical implications of flying through a storm that would degrade both their own systems and enemy capabilities. The mission would require dead reckoning navigation and visual reference points that could be maintained even when electronic systems failed. Morrison's confidence suggested he had experience with the kind of flying that relied more on pilot skill than advanced technology. "The route planning takes us through a corridor that's temporarily clear of surface-to-air missile systems," Morrison continued, tracing their flight path on the tactical display. "Intelligence assets have confirmed a 4-hour window of reduced defensive capability, but will need to maintain low altitude and use terrain masking to avoid detection. Elena studied the proposed flight path with the systematic analysis that had characterized her military planning. The route was audacious, requiring precision navigation through mountain terrain that would challenge even the most experienced pilot. But it also exploited vulnerabilities in the enemy's defensive network that conventional military planning might have been too cautious to utilize. What about extraction procedures? Elena asked, knowing that hovering operations in hostile territory would be the most dangerous aspect of the mission. The terrain around the cave system doesn't provide much margin for error. Morrison's expression grew serious as he displayed the technical specifications for the winch operation that would be required to extract the missing soldiers. We'll be maintaining hover at approximately 80 feet above the cave entrance while you operate the winch system. The aircraft will be vulnerable to ground fire for the entire duration, and weather conditions will make stable hover extremely difficult. Elena calculated the tactical implications of an extended hovering operation during adverse weather conditions. The helicopter would be exposed to enemy fire. The pilot would be flying blind in conditions that would challenge even the most advanced navigation systems. And any equipment failure would result in the loss of both rescue team and rescued soldiers. The missing team's current status is stable but deteriorating, Morrison said, monitoring communication channels that provided real-time updates on the soldiers' condition. They're conserving ammunition and maintaining defensive positions, but hypothermia is becoming a significant factor. Medical assessment suggests that extraction within the next 4 hours is critical for survival. Elena tested the communication equipment that would connect her with the soldiers she was risking her life to save. The radio crackled with static. As she established contact with the missing team, hearing voices that carried the strain of exhaustion and hypothermia, but also the discipline of professional soldiers who were prepared to assist in their own rescue. Nightingale 1, this is rescue control, Elena transmitted, using call signs that had been established for the mission. We're 30 minutes from departure. What's your current tactical situation? The response came through static and interference, but the voice was clear enough to understand. Rescue control, this is Nightingale 1. We're secure in defensive positions, but we've got 3 team members showing hypothermia symptoms. Enemy patrols are increasing frequency, and they're using thermal imaging equipment. We estimate 4 hours before our position is compromised. Elena absorbed this information with the understanding that time was becoming as dangerous an enemy as the hostile forces surrounding the missing soldiers. The approaching storm would provide tactical cover, but it would also bring temperatures that could kill even highly trained personnel if they lacked proper shelter and equipment. Understood, Nightingale 1. Maintain current positions and conserve ammunition. We'll be on station in approximately 90 minutes. Be prepared for winch extraction from your current location. The communication ended with Elena understanding that she had just made a promise to 6 soldiers who were counting on her expertise to bring them home alive. The mission was no longer an abstract tactical problem. It was a personal commitment to people who had volunteered for the most dangerous assignments and were now paying the price for intelligence failures and institutional inadequacy. Morrison completed his final equipment checks and signaled that the aircraft was ready for departure. All systems are green and we're cleared for immediate launch. The weather window is narrowing, but we still have sufficient time to complete the mission if we execute according to plan. Elena strapped herself into the helicopter's cabin, feeling the familiar weight of combat equipment and the anticipation that came with approaching dangerous operations. The aircraft lifted off with the smooth efficiency of a machine that had been designed for exactly this kind of mission. Its engines spooling up to cruising power as Morrison established their heading toward the mountains of Eastern Europe. The flight through the storm system was a testament to Morrison's skill and the helicopter's capabilities. Lightning illuminated the mountainous terrain in stark flashes, while wind gusts buffeted the aircraft with forces that would have grounded less experienced pilots. Elena monitored communication channels and navigation systems, providing tactical updates that helped Morrison maintain course accuracy when electronic systems were degraded by electromagnetic interference. "Target area in sight," Morrison announced as they approached the coordinates where the missing soldiers were hidden. "I'm picking up thermal signatures consistent with enemy patrols, but the cave system is showing clear for approach." Elena prepared the winch equipment that would be essential for extracting the soldiers from terrain that was too rough for conventional helicopter landing. The system was designed for rapid deployment under combat conditions, but operating it during adverse weather while the aircraft maintained hover would require coordination that she and Morrison had never practiced together. "Nightingale 1, this is Rescue Control. We're on station and beginning extraction procedures. Send up your first man." The winch operation proceeded with textbook precision, despite the challenging conditions. Elena guided each soldier into the helicopter's cabin with the systematic efficiency that had characterized her military service, providing medical assessment and treatment for hypothermia, while coordinating with Morrison to maintain stable hover position. The enemy patrols were closing on their location, but the storm's interference was preventing accurate ground fire. The extraction of the final soldier was completed just as enemy forces reached positions where they could engage the helicopter with direct fire. Morrison initiated immediate departure, using terrain masking and the storm's cover to break contact with hostile forces. The flight back to friendly territory was accomplished without incident, though Elena monitored the rescued soldiers' medical condition continuously and provided treatment for hypothermia and exhaustion. Landing at the secure facility where the mission had been planned, Elena felt the familiar mixture of relief and exhaustion that came with successful completion of high-risk operations. The 6 soldiers she had risked her life to save were alive and would recover fully from their ordeal. The institutional barriers that had originally prevented their rescue had been overcome by individual commitment, unconventional thinking. General Harrison met them at the aircraft, her expression showing the kind of professional satisfaction that came with missions that achieved their objectives despite impossible odds. "Outstanding work, both of you. The soldiers are going to make full recoveries, and the intelligence they gathered will be invaluable for future operations." Elena understood that the mission's success would be classified and never officially acknowledged, but she also knew that 6 families would be reunited with loved ones who had been written off as acceptable casualties. The institutional military system that had failed to produce a viable rescue plan had been bypassed by people who valued lives over procedures. The transformation was complete. Elena Vasquez had returned to her true calling, no longer hiding her capabilities behind the comfortable anonymity of civilian life. The warehouse supervisor who had been invisible to everyone who mattered had become the person whose expertise was essential when conventional solutions failed. What an incredible journey from hidden warrior to life-saving hero. Elena's story proves that true expertise often lives in the most unexpected places, waiting for the moment when courage overcomes bureaucracy. Have you ever witnessed someone whose quiet competence masked extraordinary capabilities? Or perhaps you've felt underestimated because others couldn't see past your current role? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear about the hidden heroes in your own life. If this story of courage and determination inspired you, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our incredible, true stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things when everything is on the line. Where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to share this story with someone who needs to remember that their skills and experience matter, regardless of what their job description says.